It started as a joke. I was sitting in my room, staring at the ceiling, bored out of my mind. My family was downstairs, talking in hushed voices like they always did, their words just barely audible through the walls. That's when the idea struck me. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Curiosity, maybe, or just a need to feel like I had some control. But in that moment, I decided, what if I pretended I couldn't hear them? What would they say if they thought I wasn't listening? At first, it felt harmless, like a game. I'd always suspected there were things my family wasn't telling me. My dad was always quiet, brooding, like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. My mom, she had this nervous laugh, the kind that made you think she was hiding something. And my older brother? Well, he was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect friends, perfect everything, or so it seemed. So that night, I made my choice. I walked downstairs, sat on the couch, and when my mom called my name, I didn't respond. "Sweetheart?" she said again, a little louder this time. I turned my head slowly, pretending to notice her lips moving but not the sound. Her brow furrowed, and for a second I felt guilty. But then she said, "Oh, never mind," and turned back to whatever she was doing. That was it. That was all it took. One tiny, insignificant moment, and suddenly I was invisible. Or at least they thought I was. The first time I overheard something, it didn't feel significant, at least not right away. It was late at night, and I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book while my dad and mom talked in the kitchen. Their voices were low, almost conspiratorial. I don't think they even realized I was there. At first, it was the usual stuff. Bills, chores, the kind of mundane conversation that makes you zone out. But then my dad said something that made my stomach tighten. "We can't keep avoiding this," he said. His voice was sharp, clipped, like he was trying to hold something back. "What do you want me to do?" My mom snapped, louder than she probably meant to. I froze, my eyes locked on the page of my book, even though I wasn't reading a word. The tension in their voices was thick, like a rope pulled too tight. "We should have told her by now," my dad continued, his voice dropping so low I almost couldn't hear him. "She deserves to know the truth." The truth? About what? My mom sighed, a long, shaky sound that made my chest ache. "If she finds out, it'll destroy her. She's not ready." They didn't say my name, but I knew. I just knew. They were talking about me. And as much as I wanted to jump up and demand answers, I stayed perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest. A shift in perspective. From that moment, everything felt different. I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way my dad avoided eye contact when I was in the room, how my mom would fidget with her wedding ring whenever I asked about our family. It was like the world I thought I knew had cracks in it, and now I couldn't stop staring at them. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just overreacting, worried about something small. But the more I thought about it, the less convinced I was. What were they hiding? And why did they think I couldn't handle the truth? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. If they weren't going to tell me the truth, I was going to find it myself. Pretending to be deaf wasn't just a game anymore. It was my chance to finally uncover what my family had been hiding. But looking back now, I wish I hadn't been so eager. Because the truth wasn't just dark, it was devastating. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd overheard in the kitchen. The cryptic words, the tension in their voices. What truth were they hiding from me? Why did my dad seem so certain I needed to know? And why was my mom so desperate to keep it a secret? The questions swirled in my mind, and with every passing hour, my curiosity grew. I started paying closer attention. Where people went, what they said, even how they said it. Every detail felt like a clue, a thread I could pull to unravel the bigger picture. The first clue. It wasn't long before I caught my brother in the middle of something he clearly didn't want anyone to see. I was sitting in the living room again, pretending to scroll through my phone. My brother Ethan was pacing back and forth in the hallway, talking on the phone. "No, you don't understand," he hissed, his voice low but frantic. "If they find out, it's over. I'll lose everything." I glanced up, careful not to make it obvious I was listening. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously toward the stairs. "I don't care what it takes. Just handle it, okay?" he said before hanging up abruptly. I wanted to believe it was nothing, maybe an argument with a friend or a bad grade he didn't want to explain. But the look on his face told me it was more than that. He looked scared, and Ethan never got scared. The mother's secret. Later that night, I overheard my mom on the phone again. She had a habit of talking in the kitchen after everyone went to bed, and I'd started staying up just to listen. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," she whispered. Her tone was light, almost playful, but there was an edge to it. "I told you, I've got it under control. We can't afford to make mistakes." I frowned, leaning closer to the staircase railing. Who was she talking to, and what didn't my dad suspect? "Yes, I'll meet you tomorrow. Same place, same time," she continued. Then she laughed, a soft, nervous sound that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom, the woman who practically preached honesty, was lying to my dad. And it wasn't just any lie. This sounded deliberate, calculated. Doubt creeps in. By now, the cracks in my family's picture-perfect image were starting to widen. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew the truth was far more complicated. It was strange, watching them go about their daily lives, acting like nothing was wrong. My mom smiled at me over breakfast, asking if I wanted more pancakes. Ethan ruffled my hair on his way out the door, telling me to be good. And my dad? He kissed my mom on the cheek like he always did before leaving for work. But now, every smile, every touch, every word felt like a lie. The suspense grows. And yet, despite everything I'd heard, I still didn't have answers. Just more questions. What was Ethan so desperate to hide? Who was my mom meeting in secret? And most importantly, what was the truth they were so afraid to tell me? I thought I was ready for whatever came next, but I was wrong. Because the closer I got to the truth, the darker it became. I don't think I slept at all that night. My mind was racing, replaying every word I'd overheard. The tension in Ethan's voice, the nervous laugh in my mom's late-night call, and my dad's cryptic comment about me deserving to know the truth. It was like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit, frustrating, confusing, and impossible to ignore. But what I didn't realize yet was that I wasn't just a bystander in all of this. I wasn't listening in on secrets that had nothing to do with me. No, I was at the center of it all. The discovery. The next morning, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. Again. This time, it wasn't a hushed conversation or a late-night phone call. It was an argument. My mom and dad were in their bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Their voices were low but heated, cutting through the usual morning routine. "We can't keep this from her forever," my dad said. "It's not fair." "And what happens when she finds out?" my mom shot back. "You think she's gonna just accept it after all these years?" "She has a right to know," he insisted. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. What were they talking about? What wasn't I supposed to know? "She'll hate us," my mom said, her voice cracking. "You know she will. And honestly, I don't blame her." "Hate them? Why would I hate them?" My mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots, but nothing made sense. The journal later that day, while everyone was out, I found myself in their bedroom, staring at my mom's dresser. I hadn't planned to snoop. I wasn't proud of it, but something inside me was screaming that I needed answers. I opened the top drawer, sifting through jewelry and old receipts, until I found it, a small leather journal. It wasn't labeled, but I knew it was hers. The pages were worn, the ink smudged in places, like she'd been writing in it for years. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I flipped it open. The first few entries were mundane. Notes about work, grocery lists, things she wanted to remember. But then, about halfway through, I found it. March 15th. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. Every day I feel like I'm lying to her face. I know it's for her own good, but sometimes I wonder if she'll ever forgive us when she finds out the truth. I read the sentence 3 times, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't about Ethan. This wasn't about my dad. This was about me. Unraveling the truth, I flipped through more pages, my eyes scanning for anything that could explain what she meant. And then I found it. June 2nd. I saw her looking at old photos today, and it broke my heart. She doesn't even know she's missing a piece of herself. How do you tell someone their entire life is built on a lie? A piece of herself? A lie? My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the journal. What could she possibly mean by that? The weight of suspicion. I closed the journal, my heart pounding in my chest. My family wasn't just hiding secrets. They were hiding something about me. Something big. Something that had been kept from me my entire life. And the worst part? I didn't know who to confront, who to trust. The walls that had always felt like home suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything else. The journal, the argument, the cryptic conversations. It was all I could think about. The weight of it pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. What were they hiding from me? And why did they think I couldn't handle the truth? That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my family, the journal tucked under my hoodie in case I needed it. I watched them, the way they laughed, the way they passed the mashed potatoes like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. So, how was everyone's day? My mom asked, her voice bright and cheery. Fine, Ethan muttered, barely looking up from his phone. Busy, my dad added, sipping his water. And then they looked at me, waiting for my response. I opened my mouth, ready to say something casual, something normal, but instead the words spilled out before I could stop them. What are you hiding from me? The room went still. My mom's hand froze halfway to her glass. Ethan's phone slid onto the table. My dad didn't move at all. What are you talking about, sweetheart? My mom said, her voice carefully neutral. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I snapped, my heart racing. I've heard the conversations. I've read your journal. Her face went pale. Ethan sat up straighter, glancing between me and my parents like he was suddenly on the outside of something he didn't understand. You've been spying on us? My dad asked, his tone sharp but not angry, more like he was trying to stall. Don't turn this around on me, I said, my voice shaking. I deserve to know the truth. You've all been keeping something from me, and I'm done pretending I don't notice. The family cracks. For a moment, no one said anything. The silence was unbearable. And then, my mom spoke. We were going to tell you, she said softly, her hands trembling as she set down her fork. When? I demanded. When were you going to tell me? After I overheard it? After I found out on my own? My dad sighed, rubbing his temples like he was carrying the weight of the world. This wasn't how we wanted you to find out, he muttered. Find out what? I shouted, and then, just as I thought they might actually tell me, Ethan slammed his hand on the table. What the hell is going on? He snapped. What are you guys talking about? He didn't know. I could see it in his eyes. Whatever secret they were hiding, it wasn't just from me, it was from him too. A family divided. My mom started crying, and my dad got up from the table, pacing back and forth. Ethan was demanding answers, his voice rising with every word. This is ridiculous, I said, standing up. If you won't tell me, I'll find out on my own. I didn't even wait for a response. I stormed out of the room, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. As I climbed the stairs, I heard my mom sobbing, my dad muttering something under his breath, and Ethan shouting for someone to explain what was happening. But I didn't care. If they weren't going to tell me the truth, I was going to figure it out myself, no matter what it took. The puzzle pieces start to fit. Back in my room, I locked the door and pulled out my laptop. If they weren't going to give me answers, I'd have to look for them. I started digging through old family photos, birth certificates, anything I could find. And that's when I noticed something strange. There were almost no photos of me as a baby. Ethan had entire albums dedicated to his first birthday, his first steps, his first everything. But me? There were just a handful of pictures. None of them before I was about 2 years old. Something about it felt off. The chilling realization, I stared at the screen, a lump forming in my throat. Was I adopted? Had they lied about where I came from? The idea sounded ridiculous, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. She doesn't even know she's missing a piece of herself, my mom had written in her journal. Was that what she meant? That I wasn't really their daughter? That my entire life had been a lie? I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. If I wanted answers, I'd have to confront them again. But this time, I wasn't going to let them dodge the question. I didn't wait this time. The next morning, I came downstairs with the journal in one hand and my laptop in the other. My family was sitting in the living room, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. We're doing this now, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. My mom looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. My dad avoided my gaze, staring at the coffee table like it held all the answers. Ethan looked confused, his jaw tightening as he sat back in his chair. "No more lies," I continued, setting the journal down on the table. "No more excuses. I know you've been keeping something from me. I know it's about me, and I'm done waiting for you to come clean." For a moment, no one said anything. Then my dad sighed heavily, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's time you knew." The shocking revelation. He glanced at my mom, who was already crying again, and then back at me. You weren't born into this family," he said, his voice cracking. "You were adopted." The words hit me like a physical blow. Adopted. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "You're lying." "We're not," my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came to us when you were 2 years old. We wanted to tell you, but we didn't know how." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what this meant. "So, all of this," I said, gesturing around me. "My entire life, it's all been a lie?" "No," my dad said firmly. "Your life has been real. The love we have for you is real, but we didn't know how to explain your past without hurting you." "The missing years. What about before?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Where did I come from? Who am I?" My parents exchanged a look, and I could see the hesitation in their eyes. "We don't know much," my mom admitted. "You were brought to us through an agency. They told us your biological parents weren't in a position to take care of you. That's all we were told." "That's all?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've known this my entire life, and that's all you can tell me?" "We wanted to protect you," my dad said, his tone pleading. "You were so young, and we thought it was better this way. We didn't want you to feel unwanted." The word stung like a slap. Unwanted. That's what they were trying to protect me from, but it only made it worse. Ethan's reaction. Ethan finally broke his silence, his voice shaking with anger. "Wait, so I have a sister who's not even my sister?" he said, glaring at my parents. "You didn't think I deserved to know either?" "It wasn't about you," my mom snapped, her tears replaced with frustration. "This was about her, about keeping her safe." "Safe from what?" I demanded. No one answered. A deeper mystery. "There's more, isn't there?" I said, my voice cold. "You're still not telling me everything." My dad looked away, and my mom's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the truth was finally too much to bear. "We don't know where your biological parents are now," she said finally. "But there was an incident, something that made them give you up." "What kind of incident?" I pressed. "We don't know," my dad said, his voice strained. "The agency wouldn't tell us. All we know is that they were in trouble, serious trouble, and they thought you'd be safer with us." Safer. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. The fallout. I stood there, staring at them, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and confusion. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers they clearly didn't have. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I whispered. "Why let me live my whole life not knowing who I really am?" "Because we didn't want to lose you," my mom said, her voice breaking. The room fell silent. I turned to Ethan, who was still shaking his head in disbelief. For once, he didn't have anything to say. I thought knowing the truth about my adoption would give me closure, but it only left me with more questions. Why had my biological parents given me up? What kind of trouble were they in? And, most importantly, was I still connected to that trouble somehow? My parents clearly didn't have the answers, and I couldn't rely on them anymore. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The agency's trail. The first place I started was the adoption agency. My parents had told me the name, but when I searched for it online, I found out it had closed years ago. There was nothing left, no website, no contact information, not even an address. It was like it had vanished into thin air. But I wasn't ready to give up. After hours of digging, I found a small forum where someone had mentioned the agency. They'd claimed to be adopted through it, just like me. I reached out to them, desperate for any information. After a few days, they responded. "I don't know much, but there were rumors. The agency wasn't what it seemed. A lot of kids came through there, and not all the stories added up. You should be careful." "Rumors? What kind of rumors?" My chest tightened as I read the message over and over. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about a standard adoption. Uncovering the past, I went back to the family albums, looking for anything I might have missed. In one of the older albums, tucked behind a photo of Ethan's 5th birthday, I found a document. It was crumpled and faded, but the words were clear. Placement agreement. Confidential. I scanned the paper, my hands trembling. It listed my name, my parents' names, and something else, a date and location for the adoption. But what caught my eye was a line at the bottom. Biological family history restricted under protective order. A protective order? Why would my adoption require that? The forgotten name. One detail stuck out, the name of the agency's former director. I searched for him online, and after hours of scrolling through old articles and archives, I found something. A small mention in a local news story from years ago. Agency director questioned in child trafficking investigation. I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. Child trafficking? Was that why my biological parents had given me up? Were they trying to protect me from something darker than I could have imagined? The confrontation with my parents. Armed with what I'd found, I confronted my parents again. This time, I wasn't giving them a chance to deflect. Did you know about the protective order? I demanded, holding up the document. My dad's face went pale. My mom looked at the paper and then at me, her hands shaking. We didn't know all the details, she said quietly, but we knew your biological parents were in danger. They told us it was safer if we didn't ask questions. Safer for who? I asked, my voice rising. For them? For me? Or for you? Neither of them answered. The chilling revelation. I was on my own again, piecing together scraps of information. Over the next few weeks, I learned more than I wanted to about the agency's shady past. There were whispers of children taken from desperate families, of money exchanged under the table, of records that didn't add up. And then, I found it. A name buried in an old legal filing connected to the agency. It wasn't the director or one of the staff. It was my biological father. His name was listed as a person of interest in an investigation tied to organized crime. The realization. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. My biological parents hadn't just been in trouble. They'd been running from something dangerous. And now I couldn't help but wonder if that danger would come looking for me. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. The secrets I'd uncovered weren't just about my past. They were a warning about my future. I spent the next few days feeling like a stranger in my own life. The truth about my adoption, my biological father's connection to organized crime, the agency's shady past, it was all too much. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my parents' voices, see the fear in their eyes when I asked questions they didn't want to answer. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know the full story, even if it destroyed the life I thought I had. A risky decision. I decided to track down someone who might have answers. The name of the agency's former director kept coming up in my searches, but he had disappeared years ago. However, the articles mentioned a lawyer who had represented him during the investigations, a name I managed to track to a small legal firm still operating in the city. I didn't tell my parents where I was going. I couldn't risk them trying to stop me. When I walked into the lawyer's office, my heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was expecting, answers maybe, or at least some clue about where to go next. What I got was something I never anticipated. The meeting. The lawyer was an older man, his eyes sharp behind a pair of thin glasses. He studied me for a long moment before finally speaking. "You must be her," he said quietly. "Her?" I asked. Confused. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Your biological parents spoke about you often. They made it clear that their only goal was to protect you, no matter the cost." My throat tightened. "Protect me from what?" He sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "Your father wasn't a good man, but he wasn't a monster either. He got involved with dangerous people, and when things went south, he did what he had to do to keep you safe. Your mother agreed to give you up, hoping it would keep you out of harm's way." I felt a lump form in my throat. "So they gave me up to save me?" "Yes," he said, "but it wasn't just the crime syndicate they were running from. The authorities were after them too. They thought you'd have a better chance at a normal life if you stayed out of it entirely." A choice to make. Hearing this should have been a relief, but it wasn't. My biological parents had sacrificed everything for me. But they'd also left me with nothing. No closure, no answers, just a tangled mess of half-truths and danger that might never go away. "Are they still alive?" I asked finally. The lawyer hesitated. "I don't know. The last I heard, they were under witness protection. But that was years ago." Witness protection. That meant they were still running, still hiding. And if they were alive, it was because they hadn't been found yet. Returning home, I left the office feeling more lost than ever. My biological parents were a ghost story. My family's lies a heavy weight on my shoulders. But as I walked back into the house that night, something shifted. My mom was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen. My dad was beside her, his hand resting on her knee. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. They looked up when I walked in, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt tired. "You should have told me," I said softly, standing in the doorway. My mom nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "We thought we were doing the right thing, but now, I don't know." My dad stood up, walking over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression heavy with guilt. "We were just trying to keep you safe." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "But I need to figure out who I am. I need to understand where I come from. Finding closure." Over the next few weeks, my parents and I slowly began to rebuild. They helped me sort through what little information they had about the adoption. And while it wasn't much, it was a start. Ethan eventually came around too, though I could tell he was still processing everything in his own way. I didn't know if I'd ever find my biological parents, or if I'd ever fully understand the life they were trying to protect me from. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. Looking ahead, as I sat in my room one night, staring at the few baby pictures we'd managed to find, I realized something important. My past might be a mystery, but my future was mine to shape. Maybe I'll never know the whole truth, I thought, tracing the edges of an old photograph. But I know one thing for sure. I'm not defined by the choices other people made for me. I'm defined by the choices I make for myself. And with that, I decided to move forward, not by forgetting the past, but by learning from it. Because sometimes, the only way to truly find yourself is to face the shadows and let them guide you into the light.